Thank you, Finestres, for having me again. It's a pleasure.
Bona tarda, moltes gràcies per estar aquí, gràcies a la McKenzie per haver vingut aquí a estar amb nosaltres, gràcies a Caja Negra per haver fet possible aquesta trobada i a Finestres per haver-nos acollit. Nosaltres tindrem la conversa més o menys en anglès, ja veurem què tal. Teniu la traducció allà al fons, com us deien, si us cal i si esteu més còmodes, i provarem realment de fer 40 minuts. Vosaltres també ajudeu-nos a controlar això per tenir cura d'ella, que està de gira, que està fent molts viatges, i com a dues senyores més o menys marxistes que som, tenir en compte els drets laborals de les escriptores, que també són drets humans, encara que de vegades no ho sembli. Vale? Una mica de vídeo.
Can I say there's a little space in the corner behind me if people don't understand. The floor looks very comfy if anybody wants to.
Sí, teniu espai cap allà, si voleu passar
through. Make yourself at home. She says in a space that's not really hers. Yeah, there's a little nook down there.
Bueno, una mica de bio. Per situar-nos, McKenzie Wark, nascuda a Austràlia però resident a Nova York, als Estats Units, que això és una part important per parlar avui dia. És una de les intel·lectuals més vibrants i menys previsibles del moment i que porta bastants anys i bastants llibres girant al voltant d'algunes qüestions que en aquest precís moment històric no queda dubte que van plegades, però que ella va veure fa molt que van plegades, quan les altres deien aquesta penya està flipant, sabeu? Doncs aquesta penya ja estava entenent el que està passant. La societat de la informació, el capitalisme i més enllà del gènere, l'amenaça que suposa la mobilitat de gènere. Fins i tot jo diria l'amenaça de la indefinició de gènere, que és una de les coses que m'agraden, hola Yes, que m'agrada molt del seu treball, aquesta indefinició política i afirmativa del gènere. Deixeu-me que us llegeixi només una cosa per començar, per situar-nos en aquest llibre, Amor, dinero, sexo y muerte, l'epígrafe amb qui comença és de l'Oscar Wilde i diu: Para la mayoría de nosotros, la verdadera vida es la vida que no llevamos. I al cap d'unes pàgines, McKenzie, parlant de la seva transició de gènere, afirma: No diría que ser trans ahora signifique estar viviendo mi verdad. Diría que es una ficción más adecuada. Welcome, McKenzie.
Thank you.
Totes les preguntes escrites, perquè si no, no sé si me'n sortiria amb coses tan complexes en anglès, llavors vaig llegint-les. Ara passem a l'anglès. First of all, some reading of the present, since you are coming from the USA and being a trans person in this Trump area, that can perfectly be defined through the axis love and money. Now I'm thinking on this MAGA nationalist liberal self-love, and sex and death, with this obsessive persecution of trans people, but also with the deadly deportations and the cuts off of the, for example, medical and health research all over the world. So in this perfect frame of time with your book, where are we now, McKenzie?
Well, it's bad. And this is a very big topic, so I can just hit a couple of points. My friend Jill Peterson has a little book called Short History of Trans Misogyny. Talks about the emergence of the cis state, of a state that now thinks it has to actually define what the sex of the body is, in ways that are actually a little bit unprecedented. It's not quite back to the past, it's to something a little bit new, and they're sort of grappling for language to, at one and the same time, claim that transness doesn't exist, but then also persecute those of us who don't exist under the same law. And part of it is picking the easiest scapegoat, like the smallest, most powerless little community first, but of course there'll be others, and there's simultaneous attacks on disabled people under the heading of scapegoating, right? What I think is a little different is the desire to attack the undocumented and to revive really an aggressive and overt version of white supremacy. These are a little different in that they're attempts to resegregate the labour force and to resegregate neighbourhoods. And in relation to labor, I think it's very much, there's no growth to be expected out of the American economy. Like all the things that were supposed to be the next, wave to kick consumption along failed to happen. Like we didn't get the knowledge economy, we didn't get the care economy. So it's sort of a fighting over scraps situation and a sort of persuading white people to segregate themselves from everybody else so that their chances at least are maximized in relation to populations who can then be already oppressed but then surplus oppressed over and above the regular oppressions. I think that's that component as well. So sort of three things. Maybe it's the cis state, it's trying to sort of actually define the sex of the body for the first time in really quite systematic way, and you see one thing after another. They just fired all of the trans people they could find in the armed forces, for example, just now in the last 24 hours. So there's that piece, there's the resegregating labour force piece, and the attempt to sort of revive overt versions of white supremacy. It's always been that. And then I guess one other component worth mentioning is there is a sort of eugenic, biologistic, hierarchical model of life and family. So the imposition of that on everyone, including reproductive rights, we sort of already lost. National protection of abortion rights, thanks to the court. So it's sort of imposing a model of subjugation on women, but anyone who is feminized is sort of another piece of it. Yeah. So in short, bad.
She told me before starting, I cannot bring you hope, but I can bring you joy, so I guess this is the joyful part of the thing. You anticipated all this in Hacker Manifest, that is 2004, it's like 20 years ago, and in Capital is Dead, that is 2019. I got the sensation that you said like 15 years after Hacker Manifest, you told us, you didn't listen to me, let's go back to this, I'm going to explain you again. You propose in these books that the classical structure of owners of the means of production versus workers, this classical Marxist interpretation, is mutating to something that you call the vectorialist class, being the owners of the means of distribution of information versus the hacker, the producers of the information. Translated, Elon Musk, Google, who bent over Trump in 0 seconds. Have you seen that? How fast that was with Google? And Marx and all this group versus most of us. I'm not sure if you include the consumers of the information on this. So can you explain us a little bit more about this new way of understanding the production report?
Yeah, I'd love it if the Spanish edition of Hacker Manifesto went back in print. Alpha Decay had the rights to it. I'm just putting that out there. It's a lovely press. If anyone is in contact with Alpha Decay, this book's had a second lease of life. It's coming out again in French, it's coming out in Portuguese, and so on. Yeah, I was talking 20 years ago along the lines of, all right, so there's always multiple modes of production at the same time. We were talking about landlords and peasants earlier this afternoon, yeah, which is not entirely capitalism. It's a sort of, there's ways modes of production are articulated together, and capitalism's been the dominant one for a long time, but wasn't always. What if there's an additional mode of production articulated on top of the other ones that's now dominant, and it attempts to control the whole value chain through ownership and control of information? So you can control production through the control of the vector of information, so I called it vectorless class. There might also be a subordinate class that's relatively new too, and maybe it's all those of us who work with information, which then becomes a form of property, in a sense. So what if, rather than think that we're separate professions, like all of us who work in information, we're essentially a class. It's a bit like labour, but it's not quite the same thing as sort of industrial labour, for example, or service work is different to either of that. So what if articulated on top of peasant landlord, capitalist worker is what I called vectorless class, hacker class. And then maybe that was sort of from the top down, where the dominant faction of the ruling class was sort of emerging. That's what I said 25 years ago in Hacker Manifesto. Everybody loved to say about that book, I sort of get this, but it's still all capitalism, isn't it? Why do we want capitalism to be eternal? Like, particularly those of us who don't much like it, why do we still want to think that it's an eternal essence? Like, I don't really get that. And why do we not see that modes of production are always multiple and in relations of hierarchy? This is sort of like actually Marx 101, So yeah, I've always held it up against that sense of, what I call neoliberal Marxism. It seems to be the dominant strain. Like the neoliberals hold that everything is capital, and neoliberal Marxists hold that everything is capital and they don't like it. That's the two theories. It's like, no, all right, if we actually do an analysis of production now, maybe there's a new dominant piece to it. And it just sort of, when you see it in operation, so there was like a failed coup, like January 6th, where sort of storming Congress was one model of sort of overthrowing the existing state in America, and it didn't work. There's a coup going on now, but it's like, you just get root at all of the computer systems in every government agency. And then you suddenly have power over it. And we'll see if Musk's Doge outfit really succeeds in seizing control of the means of governance. At the moment, it looks like they will. And they're doing what the tech industry always does, which is move faster than the law can keep up with you. Yeah. That's why Uber became this global phenomenon. They just broke the law in multiple countries. And they got so big that there was nothing to do about it, and then you just had to change the law around what they just did, So yeah, there's sort of a kind of fairly rapid transformation of the state that served capital into a version that might serve a different kind of ruler class. I think they mostly feel like they're up against competition from China for global dominance, and the plan is basically to ransack the American state for resources to become a global competitor for Chinese ruling class, which is, organized and functions in a different way. The part that's relevant for Europeans is part of the plan is to destroy the EU, because it's a regulatory body which, whatever its faults, functions as a form of sovereignty that is antithetical to their control of everything through information, where there's no rules and no guardrails. So I think it's a very kind of dangerous moment, and you sort of see the United States tack away from Europe also on the military level, and I think that's connected to this tack away on the economic level from partnership with the EU. So also bad, all that kind of bad.
Brexit was part of that already?
Yeah. And you see similar movements, rise of the far right in Germany. I don't have to tell you that election was unpleasant, its outcome, and this sort of significant rightward move in sort of Poland and Hungary and so on. So yeah, you see it, and forces that are interested in, and I think it's mostly opportunism. It's like picking the political force that's least likely to want to maintain the EU, which is, EU is no picnic, I'm not advocating for it, but there's worse things than having a form of transnational sovereignty in Europe.
You already point to the thing of the white supremacy, this reinforcement, but I wanted to dig a little bit more about this new panorama of vectorialism and hackers. We understand the classical ways of understanding the social hierarchy, okay? In the capitalist patriarchy racialized, like some labors are the masculinization of them, that they are the paid ones, the feminization, that they are not paid, the slavery, the racialization works through slavery, and the contemporary forms of human traffic, giving no rights to the workers, and still calling that illegal immigration. That is a guilt shift tactic that is quite specific as well. So the question is how this new vectorialist class versus hackers class is moving the powers report inside the hackers class.
Yeah, there's interesting ways that the transformation of the economy has affected the relationship between gender and life chances. And in the United States, it's probably the same here. You know, sort of women earn about 70 odd cents for every dollar men make, and that needle hasn't changed much in a very long time. If you take out, you know, sort of top corporate pay in the finance industry, women are doing better than that, and are actually sort of making gains in some industries. And so in the United States, women are much more likely to finish college, and their life chances are very much accelerated by being graduates. So there is a way in which the service and care information-centered economy it hasn't helped all women, but it's helped some women advance at the expense of men. So that absolutely has to be reversed, and patriarchy has to sort of stamp it out. And it's one of the many reasons we're seeing the destruction of the American university. One of the few things in America that actually ever worked was the university, so it must be destroyed. And we're in the middle of doing that, yeah. So there's a way that a rearrangement of what gender is around diminished opportunities in a kind of information-centric economy is sort of going on kind of as we speak. And it's got many other dimensions. I'm just sort of touching on that there. And that's connected to resegregating the workforce racially, so that you've then sort of like pushing people of colour and migrants back out of niches in the workforce where people were starting to make some headway, you know. The sort of American dream that you would come from somewhere else and the first generation would work away in some horrible kind of blue-collar work as, you know, like cleaners or factory workers, then you'd put your kids through college and they would be native English speakers, they would make money and be able to buy a house and support their parents, and then you would be Americans and you'd be living the middle-class life. No longer available for most people at all. Yeah, so hence the, you know, crabs in a barrel fighting over scraps version of it, and the resegregation of the workforce. I missed a couple of dimensions, but that's plenty of stuff to get a handle on it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go for immigration. One of the hot parts of the fascist speech in the USA and in Europe, but what is really annoying me is that it's not only the fascist speech, but it's also the left speech about immigration, is that they both rely on morality. For the MAGA, immigration is bad, based on assumptions of national supremacy, including cultural supremacy, racial supremacy, and so on, okay? But for the left, immigration is also bad, but we must tolerate it because we are good people, right? This area includes ideas like, okay, if they want to come, they can come, but that must be regulated. Or ideas that they need to adapt since they come, and they need to learn our culture since they come, and they have to become like us, because once that we allow them to come, so we keep on having this power, right? But the real conversation here is that capitalism needs workers' mobility, and less rights the workers have, better for the system. And the jackpot is workers without any rights and without any workers' solidarity based on xenophobic hatred. So the question is, how long really a very strong, very hard capitalism system can support expelling immigration? That's the question here. And also, if they keep on going, who are going to be the next group of workers without rights?
Yeah, also a lot of pieces to that. I mean, there is a real crisis of the collapse of economies and states in Central America, and one of its drivers is climate change. These are places that are very vulnerable to that. Another driver of that is the United States meddling in the internal governance of these states to prop up usually right-wing regimes, and that's sort of sending populations north and causing populations to get involved in drug trade as the only viable economic activity that's available. So like that part's real. There is a, I won't say it's a crisis, but there's more people moving north. And very important to stress, partly for climate change reasons. The United States has always been dependent on undocumented workers. Firstly in agriculture, secondly in things like food processing and meat packing and stuff like that, heavily in construction and stuff like the sort of service work that's like delivery, like service work that doesn't require fluency in English. Like the whole economy runs on that labour, and it still will. And it's already causing a crisis of where you're going to get the farm labour for the spring harvest, because a lot of people are not wanting to show up. The perverse effect of hardening the border is it meant that, which has been going on for years, right? And both parties have done this. You harden the southern border, it means that a lot of labour that used to migrate backwards and forwards seasonally with the harvests decided to stay. So the unintended consequence of making border crossings harder is people stayed in the United States rather than take their money, go back, and the dream of a lot of people in particularly in Central America is you earn some dollars and go home and build a house, right? And like that's you can't do that anymore, yeah. So the thing no one wants to address is how dependent the economy is on that labour, and how it's one of the segregations of the workforce that allows you to super exploit a class of workers based on partly on race and language, but also on documentation. A lot of those workers are showing up at farms and factories recruited by labour recruitment companies who claim they have social security numbers, but often don't. And so the actual people employing them to do the labour have this plausible deniability that someone else verified these workers, we didn't hire a bunch of illegal people, so they're trying to sort of get off the hook, through those agencies, yeah. So the Europe I can't speak to, but the United States is like heavily dependent on that labour, and it's sort of, like how do you get populations to support policies that are not in their interests? It's like, well, by not talking about what you actually want to do and rallying people around making them feel superior to somebody else who they'll get to kick around. So that's sort of like the, like the last available politics to kind of support right-wing governments in the United States. Like there is no actual plan other than that. So the deal for, and interestingly enough, not just for white workers, a lot of so-called Latino or Latinx voters also voted for Trump, because that's a very big category and includes a lot of people who've been there a long time, includes a lot of people who think they're white. So it's like the data doesn't tell you the intricate details of why Americans from Puerto Rico and Americans from Cuba are not the same category whatsoever. Yeah, so there's a lot of support from people who came from China for right-wing policies, like attempting to occupy a niche in a racialized hierarchy where they're not on the bottom. So when you get into the details of how American politics has always been racialized, like race is the center of how the center of how it all works. But the jockeying in the middle ranks for who's at the bottom, and who's at the bottom is undocumented, mostly Central Americans and people who are black. Some tiny proportion of black people have, sort of got on board with that because they think they get one step ahead of, a system puts someone beneath them. Like it's like people solidarity. Remember, we used to realize why this was sort of a bad idea, but like why white ass speaks from a place of privilege in relation to that, obviously. Either I'm also an immigrant,
Yeah. Also, there is, going to gender questions, there is a very classical capitalism idea of gender in the middle of all of this, no? With this idea of male and female based in reproduction. That was the first executive law, however they call it. So, reading again human being as their utility as machines of production, no? Of production of another human beings. And all this goes to this persecution of this very small minority of people who are trans people that you already point to that before. But why is that community that the targeted one? By also also targeted by this powerful trans-hating feminism that we are dealing with for the last, 10 years, but also with these fascist parties in the USA and Europe. Why the trans community?
I mean, there's very few of us, and we're kind of easy to kick around, and we like, you know, we make people uncomfortable. Like people don't want to deal with us, you know. It's you know, I work in a very progressive liberal institution, which is great. You know, when I came out, they're like, everybody had my name right and all that stuff immediately. But it also meant that no one dealt with their discomfort. Like no one can acknowledge, you know, that I'm like, you're weird, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's like, can we talk? We can talk about it. You know, I'm here for that. But no, so there's a lot of denial about it. One of the things that's going on is Christian nationalism, and it's a model of, you know, God the Father overall, and then father of the household over the whole household. So like a reproduction of this very, very patriarchal version of Christian theology. Then sort of writ large on the whole, you know, sort of social fabric. And we're seeing the welfare state was never great in the United States. It's just literally being torn to shreds at the moment. And part of that is, well, you know, church and family should be the only social institutions at all, is one of the models here. So an attempt to extend the remit of sort of a Christian model of social control, and it's, you know, God, president, priest, father, like those are your authorities, and the cops. You know, and they're in charge of everything. And the result for deviating from any of that is violence, you know, and exclusion. So that's always there, but that now is armed with the power of the federal state in a way that's never been before, or has not been for really for 100 years, since the 1920s, and the height of the Ku Klux Klan.
Now, are you having the solidarity of the queer community or whatever we are?
It's tricky. Every single government website got changed from saying LGBTQ plus to LGB. Like it stops. And so officially at the moment, you know, lesbians and gay men and bisexuals exist, but the rest of us don't. Like we don't exist. And you've seen that LGBT without the T has been a thing for a while. So this attempt to, there was a long, complicated history of the exclusion of trans people from gay liberation, even though trans people were there at the start of it, you know? And a kind of middle-class white model of, particularly of gay masculinity, but also, frankly, of lesbian life, you know? It's like, you too can, you know, have a kid in the suburbs and buy a house and, you know, but it's like, yeah, but not everyone gets to do that or even wants to do that, you know. So what about, pardon my English, I'm going to say one of the bad words. What about faggots? You know, that's my people. You know, what about people who want a different kind of queer life? That's the thing that's being sort of carved out. But I think the model of you can be gay so long as you're actually straight in the way that you do it, I don't think that's going to hold, you know, because like we've seen all this before, right? You start with the most vulnerable minorities, you try to get people to sacrifice them, and then you sacrifice them next, you know. Because they're not like any of us, right? That's the real story.
Yeah, yeah. Something that is amazing to me in your work is that you resist the temptation of a big binarious and capitalistic affirmation of self. You write about yourself in terms of otherness, recognizing a kind of distance between you and yourself. That is a distance that we all feel, but we all try to forget or we try to hide, especially when we write, especially also when we are in this constant attack, that the natural response to this big attack is to have a big affirmation. But you are doing a kind of double conversation. You are answering these attacks in one hand, saying, yes, I am, yes, I exist, but still you are having another conversation that is In here, we don't recognize these categories, and in here, we are something much more sophisticated than this simplicity.
I hope so, yeah. So, I mean, there's the, you know, I think it helps for there to be breathing room between politics and culture. And in politics, it's about solidarity with others who also suffer or suffer in a different way. And sometimes you need flags and you need names for things. But, you know, it's just a flag, you know, of convenience. I think, you know, culture, everyday life, what's interesting is the slipperiness of it, the non-identitarian side of it, the way we're always sort of exceeding whatever identity we're supposed to have, you know? And like, how do you write in the first person after Freud, right? Like, Freud was wrong about a lot of things, maybe, but write about how opaque we are to ourselves. Like, you know, we don't know ourselves. Like, we're kind of like, we live in this perpetual kind of fiction of who we would possibly want to be, you know? So, and that's why I didn't want to, in Love and Money, Sex and Death, write a conventional sort of trans memoir, you know? Yeah, and the conventional trans memoir is, you know, for all these years I was living a lie and now I am my true self, you know, and I'm like, honey, give that a few years, you know? And you know, and I sort of respect it, like it's, for some people that's a useful way of framing things, but it's like, I think it's more interesting to think that you move to a better fiction, yeah? And I'm not saying trans people are especially fictional, we're all fictions, like we're all made up, you know, we're all inconsistent to ourselves, like how do you write that? So I didn't want to write memoir, which is attempting to claim some sort of like truth of the self, like I actually don't find it an interesting genre. I think there's a lot of interesting writing where the I is like the empty hole in the middle of the sentence, where the whole point of it is not knowing what that is, yeah? Where you sort of, you know, I'm not trying to write the truth of the self, and I'm not writing confession, but I'm interested in intensity, you know? I want writing that has intensity, that has, you know, deep and weird and complicated emotions, and has that effect on the reader, you know? Or has an erotics, you know, or has joy, you know, and the 3 books Caja Negra have done, you know, it's like my 3 books about, you know, fucking, dancing, crying, you know, those are the things. So this is the big feelings one. You know? You can choose which one you want, you know. I read a book that's mostly about fucking, or about dancing, or about the big feelings. That's the new one. Yeah. They're all short, so you can actually get all 3. I'm just saying.
In this book, that actually there's this memoir through letters that you write sometimes to yourself, your past yourself, but also to people in your life. There is this very amazing, funny letter to your friend Veronica. That the scene is this one. You are both having lunch in a fancy restaurant in Manhattan, surrounded by these businessmen, all of them, and then they are having this very high conversation about Platon. Very complicated, but at the same time, all together they are having this very intense conversation about sex, their sexual practices, and the sexual practices of everybody around them, even if they don't know them, they are just guessing here and there. And is there that you say something like, there is always a difference between the sign of the thing and the thing itself. How I appear is an all of me. Perception always has an element of deception. Yannick, estoy en página 22. Also, you are saying we are always differing from the signs that we make. It may be a specialty Western culture kind of hang-up, but there is a nervousness about the gap between the sign and the thing. This gap between the sign and the thing, for me, is the space for culture, politics, art, even love and sex. Is this a space where it happens? And you explore this gap, being at the same time very affirmative about the right of the exploration itself. I don't know if we are talking all the time about some kind of mobility, when we talk about migrations, but when we talk about transition, and when we talk about the displacement about yourself also. The question is, do you think that queer community, or whatever we are lost we are lost in this rapport between the sign and the thing. Do you think that we are seeking the true sign for saying the true thing, that we are lost also in that, contaminated in that?
I mean, I'm old enough to have had contact with pre-gay liberation queer culture, which was all, I mean, saying English on the down low, you know, like it was a little bit quiet about itself, but you knew, like if you met somebody else, you would just like know it, you know? So it was like subtlety, it was like just little subtle cues. You'd be like, you, me, in the bathroom? I tried and failed to be a gay man 3 times. So everyone in my hometown knew I was queer, you know, and they kept telling me, and I believed them, but I picked the wrong one, you know. I'm like, I love being queer, I love being a gay man, but I think I'm attracted to women, but I'm gay. Like, oh wait, it took a long time for the penny to drop. You know, and you know, there's, again, it's also like, you need all of these things, right? So we needed gay liberation, we needed, you know, people being out, we needed people to do that assertively. But I don't think you want to then lose that the sort of subtle, ambiguous, multiform, unnameable relation to queer life. That's just, it can just be in a glance, you know, or just how close you stand to somebody. It's just in all that sort of stuff, you know. So I wanted to sort of open a little space for that and for the varieties of queer experience. So yeah, the letter to Veronica, who's sort of made up, because again, you know, there's a lot of shade that I throw at Veronica, so I didn't want to make it a real person that I know, you know. But we're white bitches and we're middle class with credit cards at work, so it's about a space of privilege. And that's up against the letter to Venus, who is a composite character that's based on trans women of colour that I've lost from my life, right? So, but they're not my stories to tell, right? So I'm trying to, at one and the same time, center marginal black trans life without claiming to own it, you know? But at the same time, here's me with, you know, my white girlfriend, you know, in this fancy restaurant. And we were playing what I call the Quentin Crisp game. I don't know if Quentin Crisp has any resonance in Spanish, but it was a famous Anglophone gay writer of the 50s and 60s, and who I met at the Australian consulate at a reception of all things. And he was bored, so he just sort of got a few people to play this game. And the game was, you look around a reception, right? And it's, you know, just people in nice dresses and with the glasses of wine. And he's like, all right, which of these people has been fucked in the ass? Who's been fucked in the ass? And what did they think about it? What did they think? That one. She has for a boyfriend, but she didn't like it. And that one, yes, he's married to that one, but you know, he's seeing someone on the side. You know, and you just make up these stories, and you like look at people and you go, that checks out. Like, yeah, right. So the Veronica story starts with that game and that sense of people are never quite who they say they are, and that's okay. You know, and as Foucault said, you know, leave it to the police to see that our names are in order, yeah? Like it's kind of important to have that space of opacity in relation to always having to sort of declare as if the self was always, you know, true to itself, like no one is.
We are, is that right? My microphone just died, so it's the signal that the time is over. Okay, yours also is gonna.
Mine's working. Yeah. For people with translation, we need working microphones. Yeah. How are we doing on time? Yeah.
Yes, we are okay in time, but
okay.
I would like to finish our part reading a piece of your book, if it's okay. The one that.
I think I know what it is.
Yes. And then we pass the microphone to you all, so you can also make some questions. Como persona académica, se espera que tengas un campo. Se trata de una mentalidad colonial. Apuesta por algo, llévate el crédito, abre un nuevo camino y defiéndelo como si fuera tu propiedad. Luego allana el camino, para que otros pueblen ese suburbio. Será tentador pensar de esta manera, pero no será tu mejor impulso. Como persona escritora, solo deseas estar de paso, dejar ofrendas, poner algo de orden y seguir adelante. Eres un vector que atraviesa instituciones, feudos y jerarquías de estatus. No vas a ver la recompensa por eso de manera convencional, pero volverán a llamarte cada vez que se aburran de sí mismos. Es una manera de ganarte la vida. Te abrirán la puerta trasera de las Torres de Marfil, como a las empleadas domésticas, y te escoltarán fuera del mismo modo. No te invitarán a que te quedes, en especial luego de haber cuestionado de dónde salió el marfil.
I mean, the irony of the United States is it's the most class-ridden aristocratic society I've ever encountered, you know, like, and I've met, like, European, like, nobles, you know, but it's like, there's nothing compared to how this works in America. And I actually genuinely understand the impulse to want to destroy it, even though it's come from the right, you know, I actually understand the impulse, even though the result's going to be a disaster. But yeah, that was, you know, I emigrated from Australia, so, you know, rich first world country, I'm white, I speak English as a first language, but my degrees are from places no one's ever heard of, so I was never going to have the great career in academia because I didn't go to, do you know what the Ivy League is? It's like, there's like a handful of universities, and if you didn't graduate from those, you were never getting the top jobs, you know? So it was just how it was. So it's like, that's so freeing. I'm just going to do whatever the fuck I want. So I like to say, you know, I got into academia to be a writer, you know, because that's the actual core of my being is writing. Like my nationality is writer. My religion is writer, my gender is writer, my sexuality is writer, yet my sport is writer, you know, like that's, and I kind of got to do that a little bit, you know, through the university.
Thank you so much.
This is way more fun than most academic conferences, so you might know, I've no regrets about any of you.
A lot of people here, I didn't see you before, no os había visto aquí detrás. Vamos con algunas preguntas y pasamos al turno de firmas, a que podáis acercaros y tener un ratito así con la firma. Un par de preguntas así, patapam. Eso que siempre que habéis querido preguntar, que luego llegaréis a casa y diréis, ¿pero por qué? Tonta, haberlo dicho, es que me daba vergüenza. Tanta gente. ¿No? Ah,
¿Quieres mi micro? Sí.
Gracias. Thank you very much to both of you. In the memoir you have a very beautiful letter to your mother, and I was thinking that in these times, with the dismantling of all other kinds of kinships and trying to bet only for the nuclear family, as you were saying, can you talk a little bit about the community you have built, not only in the queer community, but also in the raving community? How important are these other forms of kinship to sustain and to support each other and to resist?
Yeah, so a bit of background, because this is the genesis of the whole book, is my mother died when I was 6, and so I was raised mostly by my sister, who was a teenager at the time, raised by teenagers, obviously. If you want an explanation, that explains it. And you know, I had a very long time to deal with the trauma of losing my mother, yeah? But when I went on hormones, it all came back, and I had to like the emotions all had different colors, and I had to go through the whole thing all over again. And so the book, it's not the absolute beginning, it was the beginning of writing the book, it was writing to my mother, because I found a postcard she'd written to me before she died that I forgot I had, you know. So hence the letter, and hence letter form. But then the book has got 3 main sections, and it's letters to mothers, lovers, and others. And it does want to sort of move away a bit from a narrow sense of kinship, you know. Even in the mothers section, one of those is to my sister, who really sort of raised me, you know, and is sort of the center of my being in lots of ways, you know. And so then lovers, you know, like people that I've made, you know, significant connections to over the years. The other section is when it gets weird, you know. There's Trans community is in that and in two flavors. So it's middle-class white bitches like me, but then there's also, you know, I have to center what in English we call the dolls, you know, sort of trans women, usually of color, who live in nightlife, mostly do sex work, do high femme, who have nothing else, you know, but they're sacred to me, you know. So I wanted to center that, and then the other chapter in that section is a letter to a goddess, a prayer. Writing a prayer is a very hard genre when you're a third-generation atheist. And the god is Kabile, Sabile, who does not really belong to the Real Madrid football team like they think, but belongs to trans people and did, you know, it's from ancient times, you know. So the book's trying to map pathways through my own life to different models of belonging. In English we say chosen family. I don't know if it's an ideal, but neither the words family and community I find a little bit, you know, disabling in a way. Like why imitate that? We could make our own thing, you know, that will include, you know, still include raising children and all that stuff, but maybe we want different models of that, you know. So the structure of the book sort of models that attempt to weave and to not think these things are opposed or that one's better than the other, you know, to sort of weave through different forms of connectedness that I've had. And it sort of matters to me to devote a fair amount of energy in this part of my life just being an older trans woman for younger trans women who don't know that that's actually possible because there's so few of us, you know? I got to 63 because I transitioned late, you know, and this is in the book, you know, if I'd come out at 18 when I first thought about it, it's very likely I'd be dead and would not have made it to here, yeah? I would not have had access to employment. My family say they would have supported me, but I'm not sure I entirely believe them. I want to, bless their hearts, you know? I wouldn't have had jobs, wouldn't have been able to change my gender marker in my home state at the time. I very likely would have ended up doing sex work. This was before anybody knew what HIV/AIDS even was, so, you know, I just don't imagine I would have lived. And so there aren't a lot of us who are my age, you know? So that's sort of part of my job in community is just actually existing. And then the other part is, well, I know stuff. Like, you want to know how to write? I know how to do that. You want to know how to edit? You want to know how to create a persona for the public? Like, I know shit, you know? And sharing that. And trying to get other trans people paid. You know, it's like, oh, yeah, I can edit that special issue. Everybody's going to be a trans woman of color who's in it, and you're going to pay them all, right? You know, so that's sort of my job, is to sort of share that. And obviously from a position of privilege, and these things are contradictory and far from imperfect, right? But that's my life now. I have no regrets about choosing it.
¿Una más rapidísima o cerramos? Cerramos. Pues cerramos.
Last chance. I may never be back. I don't have any books in the pipeline that would bring me back. You know? Here we go.
Hi, I'm McKenzie. So I work in academia, but very differently. I'm a biologist. I'm a biologist, and all around me, like peers, professors, and so on, I've seen a complete absence of critical thinking. There's no merging of social sciences with the natural sciences. And that concerns me because it's very easy to just assume everything as it is and to not have an imagination to imagine even like the sciences, how they could be approached from a different perspective or how they could be applied differently. So very big question, but I wanted to ask you what you think the role of the intellectual might be as liberal society continues to break down and there's a need to build something new.
A lot of moving parts to that, and there's a sort of ambivalence to the lack of trust in institutional knowledge at the moment, and there are ways that lack of trust is sort of being weaponized and exploited. You know, like there's reasons to have questions about the history of medical science, for example, The most widely prescribed thing on the planet is birth control pills, which were tested on Puerto Rican women without their knowledge or consent, you know? On the one hand, great, that is a wonderful medical tool for control and autonomy of the body, but here's where it came from. This is the history of where that came from, you know? I depend on exogenous hormones. The entire history of the pharmaceutical industry in Mexico is tied to the discovery of yams, which you could easily process into estrone and progesterone and testosterone. But the farmers who harvested it got paid pennies for harvesting this yam. The entire pharmaceutical industries would... I could sort of tell these stories all night, right? So I think we kind of need that dialogue between different kinds of knowledge. And I've got entire, you know, sort of dimension of my work is about ways to do that. Like, how do we have relations between different kinds of knowledge that aren't hierarchical and don't leave it up to the market to figure that relationship out? What's a comradely way we can make knowledge together, yeah? Actually, my book, General Intellects, is in Spanish, and it's trying to do that. Like, these different ways of knowing the world don't add up to one unified picture, but you learn from the gaps in between, from the way that different pieces of knowledge of the world tell you something, but they don't quite ever add up to the grand synthesis of dialectical materialism or anything like that. That's not there, yeah? So I think it's sort of very important, and to not have different kinds of knowledge put at war with each other, you know? In universities in the United States, it's been shutting down humanities departments to put the money into STEM. The catch is humanities departments actually make money. So, you just shut down the thing that was subsidizing all these other fields, you know. But now the government is shutting down STEM. Like, great, you know, the most absurd bit of that is papers in mathematics on government websites have been redacted if they contain the word transition or the word equality, whereas these are words that happen in mathematical discourse that have nothing to do with anything social, right? So, like, absurd shit, like the triumph of, you know, kind of meme-driven, celebrity-based nonsense culture is kind of terrifying to me. So, how do you, at one and the same time, maintain the argument? There are a lot of reasons to be critical about how knowledge has been organized. On the other hand, the destruction of its institutional practices is a disaster. So I think that's sort of the challenge, and there's sort of like really important work to do to base the defense of the university around what it could be, rather than just sort of what it is. So when I say, I'm sorry you work in a university, I love universities, I think they're important institutions, but not in their current state, you know? So it's like holding those two thoughts together at the same time is sort of the challenge. But again, there's many other moving parts to that. I'm just, you know, hitting a couple of points. I'm so happy I became a teacher, I gotta say, you know. So I have no regrets about that whatsoever. I love teaching.
One last one?
Yeah, I'm here for it.
Here.
Maybe you're gonna say you're sorry too. I'm in institutional politics right now.
That one's more good luck.
Here in Barcelona, in Spain, in Catalonia, we are in a different moment, but we are like in the moment, like hiding because the monster's gonna come real quick. It's gonna come, he's gonna come, and we are trying to like run everywhere because we don't know where to go. Now it's a different situation than in the States, and my question, and also trying to bring up everything that you said about immigration. I mean, immigration here, we're in a different moment, like right now here, because immigration, there is not, I don't want to say there's not even people with wealth, but like the European dream or the Spanish dream or whatever, we have not come to, I mean, for example, I'm the only elected here in Barcelona that is non-white, the only one, and it's a 25% people here. So the question is, you in the States have like literally a foot on your neck right now. What are the strategies that you are trying to do while you are in that shelter, to create community, to create new horizons, to create hope? You say you didn't bring hope, but we got joy, and that cannot be taken away from us. So what can we learn from what you are experiencing right now, community-wise, and how, I know maybe institutional politics is not the place to be right now, but you know, we're trying to do our best, whatever. I mean, because sometimes I think, okay, we leave, then they come, and it's not gonna be any better. I'm being really chaotic right now, but así
Yeah, no, I
So yes, what can we learn what can we learn from institutional politics of these strategies that are taking place? Maybe we need to leave the institutions and go to that shelter and build that shelter and create politics in other way that, because we made a lot of mistakes that took us here. And we keep on doing the same moral speeches, the same maiden sentences, and I mean the sense of hope is, of hopelessness is really big. So I don't know how to.
I have to preface this by saying, in my 20s, politics was what I thought I was going to do with my life. But I met people who were really good at it, and I wasn't. And one of them is now Prime Minister of my country, who I used to like, you know, in meetings, and we would like, we're in the same faction, you know, but you're always like trying to get votes and all, you know, that sort of stuff. I think my mic cut out. And somebody else I met in that milieu also went to jail for corruption, you know. So politics is complicated, and it turned out it wasn't for me, you know. I'm just not good at it, you know. Like there's a skill set, and I recognize the value of it. It's not what I do. So it's not something I can speak to with authority. Because I just show up, you know, I don't, you know, claim to know how to do it. There's maybe a couple of things you could point to in the sort of American debacle. At the less than national scale, you know, kind of like actual, genuine, left of center candidates didn't do that badly. Like, so long as they seemed authentic and sort of stuck to their guns on stuff and actually talked about the stuff people care about, which was everybody lost their bonus COVID money shortly before this election, so that fucked everybody up. The inflation problems were real. Eggs used to be $3 and now they're $8. You know, like that's just real. The rents are too damn high, as we say in New York. No one can afford to live anywhere where there's a job, but you also can't afford a car to get to the job. And we don't have public transport, so it's like, you know, when I'm in Europe, I'm like, God, the subway works. I don't know what you're complaining about. This is like golden. You know? So yeah, like the focusing on those material issues really mattered, and it worked where people did it. But the other thing I think is that conceding to the frame of the right incrementally doesn't work, because this became the Democratic Party consultants after the election. We're all like, so many of them were like, well, we should have thrown the trans people under the bus. I'm like, but it wasn't even a policy. Like, Kamala Harris said nothing in favor of it to the benefit of trans people at all in the entire campaign, you know? So it wasn't our fault. Sorry, we're not the reason. But could she talk about the price of eggs convincingly to anybody? No, you know, to the stuff that really matters. So, you know, if on the one hand you've got a bunch of focus group consultant blather about, you know, hope or whatever, or you've got someone speaking in very direct language saying, yeah, your life might not get any better, but we can fuck up somebody else. Like, that's emotionally more appealing, you know? Like, what's the emotional core of the left of center promise at the moment, you know? Because you can't really promise we're just gonna magically use economic growth to spread it around a little more, because there ain't any growth and there ain't any more. Yeah. So what's a compelling narrative around? Let's share what we've got. And when we start turning on each other, that really just only benefits ruling class, yeah? And even in the States, like, Americans do not have a very robust political education, you know? My God, I was in like Basque country on my last tour, and people are telling me 4 generational stories of their family's involvement in the movement. You know, like, okay, respect, you know? And I come from people who like that. Like, my family in the labor movement, 4 generations, you know, and they'll tell you stories. So, like, I get that, but a lot of people don't have that in America, and I think that's becoming a worldwide problem. People just don't have that gut sense of whose side they're on, you know? And that only ever benefits the ruling class, yeah? Who kind of need to strip the state for parts to, like, fuel this sort of, like, engine of growth on something, because there's no new product, yeah? Did any of us really want, like, the headset, metaverse, immersive VR? Like, no. Did we want crypto? Like, no. Do we actually want AI? Like, a little bit, but not so much, and it's gonna, like, turn our jobs into crap? So, like, no. Like, there's no product. Like, there's no new thing, right? So it's like, oh, okay, so instead of actually doing the capitalism thing of building new shit and selling it, and making life better, at least within its own consumerist terms, it's like strip the state for parts, yeah? Like, destroy it and use that surplus to fuel the ever-ending growth of a handful of corporations. Like, that's where we're at. So I kind of think it's back to, like, Popular Front strategies around that, yeah? I say, you know, I grew up in the labor movement. Every single version of that was defeated in the 20th century. So there's really no point in arguing who was right. You know, like, we all lost, you know, like the Euro communists and the Trotskyists and the Social Democrats and the Council communists, like, we all lost. None of it worked. So there's no point in having arguments about any of that, right? The one last thing I would add is, I think it's also very important to maintain the power in social movements, because with all due respect to your participation in the electoral system, it's driven by social movements in one direction or another. And you're sort of really doing your electeds a favor if you've got a mobilized population who's able to show up for something, yeah? Like, you can't just rely on the ballot box. It's like, no, we're all gonna show up and say, this is what we need now. And if you don't, you know, at least acknowledge that and fold it in to what you can offer, then we're withdrawing support, you know? Yeah, so that's sort of where we're at with that. So, you know, what do I know from politics, you know? And full disclosure, in America, I didn't get to vote. Like, I have a green card, you know? I'm a resident alien. Every electoral season, you know, everyone's like handing out their leaflets, and I just get to say, resident alien, resident alien. You know, I don't get to vote.
Are we closing?
On that note, I will sign books. And they'll probably set me up somewhere to do that. But thank you all. It's always a pleasure to be in Barcelona.